a simple line, but it says a lot about how deeply human beings are shaped by stories we're told when we're too young to question them, and how hard it can be to untangle ourselves from them later. Today, something is quietly happening across countries where questioning religion was once unthinkable. More and more people in Muslim-majority societies are letting go of belief, not just drifting from religious practice, but walking away from belief itself. The shift is subtle, often hidden, but it's there, and it's growing. These are places where religion still dominates public life, education, law, and even private identity. Yet under the surface, in whispers and online chat groups, among university classrooms and city cafes, a silent transformation is underway. For decades, atheism in these regions was considered nearly non-existent, not because nobody doubted, but because most didn't dare say it. The costs were too high: social rejection, legal consequences, even death. In many cases, just admitting to disbelief could destroy your future, your safety, or your family. So why now? What's changed? The internet is part of the answer. For the first time, a teenager in Riyadh or Cairo or Karachi can read the thoughts of someone in Oslo or New York in real time. They can access books, videos, forums, entire worlds of thought that challenge religious doctrine from every possible angle. And when you've grown up being told there are no questions left to ask, that everything important is already known, just one contradiction can shake the whole structure. But it's not just about outside influences. Much of this shift is internal. It's driven by people who've looked closely at the religious texts they were told to memorize and started noticing what wasn't adding up. They saw contradictions, outdated laws, cruelty masked as morality. They heard calls for compassion from religious leaders in one breath, and in the next, calls for punishment, exclusion, or violence. Many began asking, if this religion is divine, why does it look so much like something created by men? Men from centuries ago with the same fears, prejudices, and political instincts as anyone else. And the more they asked, the clearer it became. Doubt wasn't the enemy. It was a tool, a way to make sense of things that didn't quite fit. This kind of awakening can be lonely, especially in places where the word atheist is still used like a curse, or where disbelief is seen not just as wrong but as corrupt, even dangerous. So it often happens in silence, in late-night reading sessions, in anonymous message boards, in long walks after uncomfortable prayers, in that growing internal tension between what you were taught to believe and what you actually see in the world. Many people who stop believing don't make it public, and that makes sense. But even in silence, these choices matter. They're changing things, slowly but powerfully. According to a 2019 survey by Arab Barometer, nearly 1 in 5 people under the age of 30 in certain Arab countries said they no longer identified as religious. In Tunisia, the number was almost 1/3. In Iran, a major 2020 study found that over 40% of the population said they had stopped believing in religion altogether. These are not small numbers, and they didn't appear out of nowhere. Something is shifting, not in one country, but across regions, across languages, histories, and political systems. From Morocco to Indonesia, from Iran to Sudan. Young people, intellectuals, artists, scientists, even religious scholars themselves are reevaluating what they were taught to believe. Not because they hate religion, but because they started thinking clearly and honestly about it. They looked at the suffering caused by dogma, the way it limits curiosity, the way it justifies inequality. And they began to ask, what if this isn't sacred? What if this is just a system? A system that served a purpose at one time, but no longer fits the reality we live in. Religion has always had a way of protecting itself, not through evidence or reason, but through fear. The fear of hell, the fear of being alone, the fear of offending something invisible and all-powerful. But once that fear starts to lose its grip even a little, The questions come quickly. Why is it that the same religion that claims universal truth has splintered into dozens of sects, each insisting the others are wrong? Why does faith need protection through law, through blasphemy codes and censorship, if it truly stands on its own? Why are believers so often told not to question? Why is doubt treated as a threat instead of a natural part of being human? And why do so many of the so-called miracles in religious texts sound exactly like the superstitions of ancient tribes, rather than the insight of a divine mind? These aren't new questions. Philosophers have been asking them for centuries, but for many people in Muslim-majority societies, asking them publicly is still a radical act. And that's what makes the current shift so significant. It's not being led by governments or institutions or media outlets. It's coming from individuals, quietly, carefully, but with growing confidence. They're finding each other, too, through private online spaces, digital communities, encrypted messaging apps. They're comparing notes, sharing experiences, and discovering that they're not alone. Many of these people still live in countries where apostasy, leaving religion, is punishable by law, where blasphemy can get you jailed, exiled, or worse, so they speak carefully. But they speak, and they write, and they build spaces where critical thinking can survive. And little by little, something shifts. Even religious families, once fiercely rigid, are beginning to soften around the edges. You hear it in the way parents talk to their children, in the way siblings debate each other over dinner. Not always with acceptance, but with less certainty. With less of that old, rigid assurance that religion has all the answers. It's a crack in the wall. A small one, but enough for light to start coming through. There's another layer to all of this, one that doesn't get talked about much. The psychological weight of growing up religious and then stepping away from it. It's not just a matter of changing your mind. It's rebuilding your inner world, letting go of rituals that once gave you comfort, realizing that some people may never understand your decision, that some relationships might never fully recover. And yet, people still walk that path. They do it not because it's easy, but because the alternative, pretending to believe in something you no longer accept, feels even harder. This kind of honesty, this courage, often goes unnoticed, but it's reshaping entire societies from within. It's the quiet revolution of people who've decided that truth matters more than tradition, that reason is more reliable than revelation. And while many of them may never call themselves atheists, may never speak those words out loud, their lives are speaking for them. There's still much more to unpack. In many of these countries, religion isn't just something personal. It's written into the law, woven into politics, stitched into identity cards and school books and marriage contracts. It's everywhere, all the time. And that creates a strange paradox. The more religion is forced into daily life, the more people begin to feel how unnatural it can be when it's no longer chosen, but imposed. When prayer is mandatory, it becomes a chore. When religious dress is in force, it stops being spiritual and starts being political. When sermons are backed by the state, people stop listening for meaning and start listening for control. Over time, this pressure builds resistance. And not always in the open. Some people continue going through the motions, saying the prayers, fasting during Ramadan, avoiding public questions, not because they believe, but because it's safer not to stand out. This outward conformity can be misleading. From the outside, it looks like belief is strong, but inside, many are drifting. They're sitting through the same sermons, reading the same verses, and quietly thinking, this doesn't speak to me anymore. And when enough people start feeling that way, even if they never say it out loud, it changes the culture. You can see it in the kinds of books that are selling, the kinds of podcasts and videos that are gaining traction, the quiet shifts in conversations among friends who used to speak only in religious terms, now slipping into philosophy, science, ethics. not because they're trying to reject their culture, but because they're searching for meaning beyond old answers. There's another reason this shift is happening now. Religion, for all its claims to divine wisdom, has been slow to adapt. It still clings to rules written in the 7th century, applied to 21st century lives. It offers answers that no longer fit the questions people are actually asking. Questions about gender and sexuality, about democracy and freedom, about knowledge and truth and the value of doubt. And when religion responds to those questions with either silence or punishment, people look elsewhere. They look to science, which welcomes questions, to philosophy, which encourages complexity, to literature, which holds up the full range of human experience. And they start to see that morality doesn't need a divine source to be meaningful, that you can care deeply about justice and compassion and truth without tying it to a supernatural belief system. For many, this realization is both freeing and frightening. It opens up a world without boundaries, but also without the safety net religion used to provide. And yet, despite the fear, they keep going. Because once you see that the system is human-made, its rules, its stories, its moral claims, it becomes impossible to unsee. There's something else that often pushes people away from belief, the gap between what religion claims and how it's practiced. They see religious leaders preaching humility while hoarding wealth, calling for modesty while enjoying power, promoting peace while excusing violence. They see religion used to justify inequality between men and women, straight and queer, believer and non-believer, not just socially but legally. And they begin to ask, if this is God's system, why does it look so much like a tool for control? Over time, these contradictions wear down trust, and once trust is gone, belief rarely stays. Many young people in Muslim countries today are asking, sometimes silently, sometimes out loud, what does it mean to be moral without religion? And what they're finding is that morality doesn't fall apart without belief. In fact, it often becomes clearer, more thoughtful, more consistent, because it's based on empathy, reason, and shared human experience, not on fear of punishment. They're realizing that being good isn't about pleasing a deity. It's about how you treat people, how you use your mind, how you contribute to a world that's shared by everyone, not just believers. And once that insight takes hold, religion starts to seem less like a source of truth and more like an obstacle to it. That doesn't mean everyone becomes an outspoken critic. Most don't. In many places, it's too dangerous. But even quiet rejection has power. Every person who chooses not to believe, even silently, sends a signal that it's possible to live with integrity and honesty outside religion. And when those signals add up, they create momentum. In Iran, for example, religious disillusionment has been rising for decades. The Islamic Republic tried to fuse religion and government, and what followed was corruption, repression, and violence in God's name. Many Iranians today associate religion not with peace or meaning, but with dictatorship, surveillance, and hypocrisy. In Egypt, the Arab Spring briefly opened the door to new ideas, and while political hopes were crushed, intellectual curiosity didn't go away. It moved underground, then online. And across North Africa, more and more young people are quietly stepping away from religion. Some become secular Muslims, some agnostics, some just undecided. But the one thing they have in common is this: they no longer accept religion simply because they were born into it. That kind of shift from inherited belief to chosen worldview is enormous. And it's not just limited to young people, older adults too. Parents, professors, business owners are quietly rethinking things they once took for granted. For some, the change comes slowly, through years of private reflection. For others, it hits all at once, after a personal loss, a political event, or a sudden realization that the beliefs they were raised with no longer make sense. It's not always a clean break. Many still feel emotional ties to their religious background, to the poetry of scripture, the rhythm of prayer, the memories of family rituals. But emotional attachment isn't the same as belief, and more people are learning to separate the two. They're learning that it's possible to appreciate cultural heritage without subscribing to its theology, to value tradition without needing to pretend that myths are facts. And in doing that, they're creating space for something new, a space where you don't have to choose between blind belief and total alienation, where you can live with honesty, complexity, and uncertainty, where you can question everything and still live fully, ethically, meaningfully. That space is growing. We'll continue this journey in the next part. The interesting thing is, most people who stop believing aren't doing it because they've found some new ideology to replace religion. They're not switching teams. They're simply stepping back and looking at everything with clearer eyes. What they see is that many of the rules they were told were eternal truths are actually just old opinions, social customs that were elevated over time to the status of divine commands. And when you peel away the supernatural claims, what's left is a structure designed for social control, dressed up as sacred law. In many Muslim countries, religion is tangled up with identity. It's not just about belief, it's about who you're allowed to be, what you're allowed to say, who you can love, how you must dress, what you can question. That makes it hard to walk away quietly. Because disbelief isn't just a private choice, it's treated like a threat to the family, the community, the whole idea of order. But that pressure is exactly what's pushing people to think more critically, because once you realize that you're not allowed to think freely, it becomes clear that something is wrong. And what's striking is that many of the people walking away from religion aren't doing it because they were never religious to begin with. Often it's the opposite. They were once deeply devout. They studied the texts, they memorized the prayers, they followed the rules. And that's why they saw the flaws so clearly, because they looked closer than most. They asked, if this is all supposed to come from an all-powerful, all-knowing source, why does it feel so limited, so human? Why does it reflect the worldview of men who lived over 1,000 years ago, with their tribal politics, their gender roles, their narrow vision of the universe? Why does it say so little about compassion for outsiders and so much about obedience to authority? Why does it glorify suffering and threaten those who ask too many questions? The answers, when they come, are rarely satisfying. And for many, that's the beginning of the end. Still, it's not easy. Letting go of religion doesn't just mean changing your beliefs. It means losing part of your social world. It can mean being seen as arrogant, ungrateful, even dangerous. It can mean pretending just to avoid confrontation, or staying silent even when you hear things that go against your conscience. That's the weight of disbelief in a religious society. Not because doubt is weak, but because it's treated as if it's contagious. And maybe it is. Maybe that's why so many regimes try to stamp it out. They know that one honest voice can start a ripple, that one person living without fear can make others start to ask questions they've been avoiding. And once those questions start, they're hard to stop. Because religion isn't just a set of ideas. It's a social contract, a hierarchy, a power structure. And when that structure starts to crack, it doesn't go quietly. That's why so many ex-believers in Muslim countries are targeted. Not for what they do, but for what they represent. A break in the chain, a refusal to obey without evidence. And yet, despite the risks, the number of people thinking this way continues to grow. In places where atheism is criminalized, people still find ways to speak, in art, in poetry, in satire, in quiet conversations late at night. They express their doubts through metaphor, through science fiction, through allegory, through humor. And in doing that, they chip away at the edges of a system that depends on silence. What's remarkable is that most of these people don't want to destroy anything. They're not out to attack culture or mock tradition. They just want the freedom to think for themselves, to live honestly, to seek truth without being punished for it. That desire isn't radical, it's human. But in places where religion has fused with power, even basic honesty can be seen as rebellion. That's what makes this movement, if we can call it that, so quietly powerful. It's not loud, it's not organized, it doesn't have leaders or slogans, but it's growing. And it's not just growing through argument, it's growing through experience. People are seeing for themselves that morality doesn't collapse when religion fades, that life doesn't lose meaning, that families can still love each other, that communities can still care for each other, that the sky doesn't fall when you stop believing. In fact, for many, the world opens up. They find beauty in science, in the vastness of space, in the strange complexity of the human brain, in music and literature and friendship and love. They find ethics in empathy, not obedience. They find purpose in creativity, not submission. They discover that questions aren't something to fear, but something to cherish. It's a profound shift, not just for individuals, but for entire cultures. And while it's still early, the signs are there. In the books being written, in the songs being sung, in the subtle jokes that wouldn't have been possible a decade ago, in the courage of those who say what they think, even when the cost is high. It's happening in real time, a slow unraveling of unquestioned authority, a reawakening of individual thought. Some people will see this as a crisis, others will see it as liberation, but either way it's happening. And there's one more thing worth mentioning. Most people who leave religion don't become angry or bitter. They become quieter, more thoughtful, less certain. Not because they have fewer answers, but because they've learned how fragile certainty can be. They've learned that the world is complex, that truth isn't handed down from above. It's discovered, slowly, through trial and error, through curiosity and conversation. And that no idea, no matter how ancient, is beyond question. Even the sacred. In the end, the most powerful change isn't happening through debate or protest or public speeches. It's happening one mind at a time. One person who quietly sets the holy book aside. One young woman who asks why she can't question the rules that govern her body. One teenager who stops pretending during prayer and starts reading about the universe instead. Each of those moments, small on their own, are part of a larger shift, a rethinking of what belief means and whether it's necessary at all. And what's striking is that many of these people don't even use labels. They're not interested in calling themselves atheists or secularists or humanists. They're just living differently, thinking differently, choosing for themselves. They're moving away from religion, not toward anything else in particular, but toward honesty, toward clarity, toward a way of life that doesn't depend on ancient scripts or invisible forces. And the more people see that this is possible, that you can let go of belief and still live fully, the more others begin to ask, what's really keeping me here? For some, it's fear. For others, habit. For many, it's the weight of family and community. But when belief is no longer sustained by conviction, only by pressure, it starts to wither. And that's what we're seeing in real time. It doesn't mean religion will disappear overnight. It won't. Institutions that have shaped entire civilizations don't collapse easily. They shift, adapt, rebrand. But underneath those surface changes, something deeper is happening. More and more people are realizing they don't need religion to be moral or fulfilled or human. And that realization spreads, not through argument, but through example. It spreads when someone you respect says, quietly, I don't believe anymore. And you see that they're still kind, still thoughtful, still grounded. It spreads when you realize that some of the most decent people you know don't believe in any God, and never needed to. It spreads when the world fails to match what religion promised, and instead of retreating deeper into faith, you step outside of it entirely. And once you do, things look different. Not easier, always, but clearer, more honest. You begin to see how much of what you were taught was about conformity, not truth, about obedience, not understanding. And you begin to ask, if this God needs to be protected by laws and censorship and threats, how powerful is he really? That question alone is enough to change everything. It's a quiet revolution, no banners, no chants, just people waking up from an old story and choosing not to keep telling it. And the story that's replacing it isn't one single narrative, it's many, open-ended, evolving, full of questions. It's a story about what it means to think freely, to live ethically without divine command, to build meaning from the ground up, not receive it from above. That's not emptiness, it's possibility. It's not despair, it's clarity. And for those who've made that shift, in Iran, in Egypt, in Pakistan, in Tunisia, in Saudi Arabia, in Sudan, in Turkey, and Algeria, the silence that used to come from fear is now becoming something else. A quiet confidence. Because once you let go of belief and find that the ground doesn't fall out from under you, something changes inside. You realize that you were never being held up by faith, you were holding yourself up all along. And that changes everything. That's the rise we're seeing now, not a movement with leaders and slogans, but a spreading awareness that belief is not required to live well. That tradition is not the same as truth. That religion doesn't need to be destroyed, it just needs to be outgrown. And in more and more lives across more and more countries, that's exactly what's happening. Quietly, steadily, one person at a time,